Creatures of the Night. Interlude 1. Solitaire. The setting sun glinted off the snowy peaks that lined the horizon, which forced the fisherman to hold up his hand in defense of the oncoming beams. The fisherman, known to a few simply as Grayson, looked to the east, noticing the purplish hue in the sky that promised the encroaching night. The man reeled in his lure and tied it around the pole, then picked up the smelly, slimy sack of fish off the rocky riverbank. He made his way through the thick shrubs and vines back towards where he parked his recreational vehicle. Grayson was the type of man to live off the land and only take what he needed. In the off-season, he would spend his time begging for money from town to town. But at this point in the year, he would try to live by his own means as much as possible. The man reached his only piece of property and opened the flimsy door on the side. Inside the RV was little more than a poorly made fold-out bed, a stack of Grayson's personal letters and receipts, and a mini-fridge that was crudely duct-taped to the wall so as to prevent it from rattling around when he drove. He opened the mini-fridge and placed the sack of fish on top of a bag of ice, then closed the door. Unlike most people he occupied the country with, Grayson didn't believe in such things as property. He believed that respecting the land was more important than any arbitrary contact between people. Besides, so long as he was gone before anyone knew he was there, he could get away with spending a night or two pretty much anywhere. That isn't to say he hadn't experienced any warning shots. Just last week he found a perfect ridge to settle down on, when a bullet whizzed by and smashed his left side mirror. A foot to the right, and the ground would have been covered with more than broken glass and dust as Grayson tore away down the winding road. He couldn't understand why people were allowed to quote-unquote own all of that land if they weren't even using it for anything. He sat down in the driver's seat and consulted a map on the dashboard to see where he was. There was a road nearby, but in his walk, he also noticed a dirt path that looked to be fit for a vehicle. Consulting the map, the path before him was unmarked, and appeared to intrude on a vast wooded area that went on for acres. Figuring this could be a good opportunity to find a secluded spot for the night, he followed the river path until it diverted left, into the woods. The sky instantly darkened as he flicked on his brights in order to watch for anything he might hit. The further he drove down the dirt road, the more suspicious he became of its legitimacy. It seemed to be some kind of path that people had driven on, but something about the way it twisted and turned through the trees made it seem more homemade, like someone off-roaded on the same route every day for a week. He suspected it was recent because of the dark, fresh complexion of the soil he drove over, along with the patches of still green grass uprooted on either side of the tire tracks. All Grayson was hoping was that this patch of woods wasn't currently populated, so that he could stay for the night and remain unnoticed. Because of this paranoia, he didn't want to follow the path all the way to the end, in case someone might be there. Instead, he simply pulled his camper off into a flat clearing. The vehicle jostled over the rough terrain and came to a stop. Grayson opened the door and stepped out, getting a good look at the patch of land. Or what of it he could see in the darkness. The makeshift road to his right continued down for about 40 more meters before veering off to the left and out of sight. Down through the trees in that general direction, he could make out the faint light of what could be a building, or maybe even a campfire. The small flicker of bright yellow shifted in and out of his view as the wind blew the naked tree branches, causing them to bow and dance. The man strained his ears, listening hard for anything above the howling, whistling breeze, but was unable to make out unnatural noises. Just the low hum of a land that jostled with nocturnal life. Taking a seat on the steps of his RV, the man decided that it was too dark to try and find another location. Sometimes he would spend the whole night looking for a spot, only to end up sleeping through the day in a parking lot before getting kicked out for doing so. From within the vehicle, Grayson produced a small gas stove, a can of soup, and a fold-out card table. He set the table up at the bottom of the stairs and placed the stove on top, igniting it. From the stove grew a patch of small blue flames in a ring below the burner. It wasn't much light, but it was enough for Grayson to see the deck of cards he dealt to himself for a game of solitaire. Meanwhile, he punctured the lid of the soup can with his can opener. When he did, he felt as though he heard something from within the woods as well. He wasn't sure, but it sounded like a branch snapping, as if it had been stepped on. His eyes scanned the rim of the woods, though nothing stood out within the dark mass beyond the trees. Chalking it up to an animal, a deer perhaps, the man returned his attention to the can of soup that was now uncapped and ready to be placed on the stove. As the broth boiled and his game of solitaire was set up, Grayson thought about the bag of fish in his fridge and how he would rather be cooking one of them instead. Were he in a more secure location, he would have put in the work to clean and cook the fish, though the act brought him unwanted attention. The rotten smell of fish guts had once attracted a pack of mangy coyotes to his campsite, in the unfortunate time when his RV's battery was dead. They prowled circles around his hopeless camper, whilst the fish rotted inside, which only made them more desperate for entry. Eventually, he caved and dumped all the rotten fish out the window, in hopes that it would satisfy them, though this only caused them to wait and beg outside his camper all day and night. Finally, his battery was jumped by a state trooper who was far too nice and didn't ask enough questions to figure out that Grayson wasn't supposed to be there. He drove away, thanking his lucky stars that those coyotes hadn't found a way inside whilst he slept, waking often to their howls and cries for more meat to be thrown from the dead vehicle. Grayson pondered the event as he finished up his game of solitaire. He wondered if he hadn't given any fish to the coyotes, maybe they would have just walked away and left him alone. Alternatively, he wondered if denying them of the fish could have made them more aggressive and forceful than just their simple begging. He stacked the cards into a neat pile and turned to his soup to stir it. When he turned his head, he spotted the face of a dog peering from behind a shrub on the tree line. It appeared to be a yellow lab, with its head close to the ground. The dog didn't look at Grayson straight on, rather staring around the bush at him with careful eyes that seemed almost too aware of what it was they were looking at. Grayson hadn't seen the dog before, hadn't heard it approach, and certainly didn't see anyone around who was likely to own the animal. He whistled at it, but the lab just continued to stare at him without moving a muscle. The thought occurred to him that the dog might belong to whoever owned the land, though it didn't have the posture of an animal that was territorial. It seemed rather curious. He thought about tossing the fish to the coyotes and the dilemma he came up with in his own mind. Silently, he decided that throwing the fish must have satisfied their appetite for his flesh at least a little bit. The dog didn't react, only shifting its eyes up to keep locked on his as Grayson stood and backed into his camper. He opened the mini fridge and grabbed one of the slightly frosty fish out of the bag. When he returned to the doorway, the dog was gone. He looked for a moment and jumped when he noticed the lab had moved closer, now standing behind a large oak tree only a few feet away from where Grayson was parked. At this close of a distance, Grayson noticed some odd things about the dog. The first was that it was no longer low to the ground, but almost eye to eye with Grayson, still peeking its face around the corner with a knowing gaze. The other thing that caught his attention was positioned on the trunk just below the face. It was familiar, but wrong in the picture, like a blotch of color in an old film. A hand grasped the edge of the trunk, positioned in a way a child would when investigating a noise they heard on Christmas Eve. The pose shared the same mischievous nature as if the dog was trying not to be seen by the hypothetical Santa Claus, which was, in this case, Grayson. Something about the pose also suggested that the dog didn't really mind being seen, the same way a child might be fascinated by St. Nick's presence. Grayson met its eyes again. Staring into them, he noticed for the first time the blue iris that rimmed large pupils, which he had never seen on a normal lab before in his life. Something he became certain in a moment that the thing before him was not. Overwhelmed with fear and unsure what else to do, Grayson held up the dead, frozen fish and offered it to the creature. With an unnaturally human, clawed hand, the dog grasped the fish and took it. For a moment, the thing looked at it carefully. Then, it lifted the fish by its frozen tail above its head, dangled it in the air, and lowered it slowly into its mouth, revealing large, numerous fangs in the process. Grayson stood there, stunned. He wormed one hand into his jean pocket for his keys as the creature chomped and slurped down its icy meal. Once it was done, the unnaturally blue eyes of the beast met Grayson's. This moment prompted him to reconsider his prior conclusion. Feeding the coyotes was a bad idea all along. Where there was one meal, predators could expect another. A long, worm-like tongue extended from the creature's mouth and licked the remaining scales and sinew that clung to its canine lips. All the while, those blue eyes sunk deep into Grayson's. The small light produced by the gas stove flickered for a moment, and then extinguished, which plunged the clearing into its natural state of darkness. Grayson's eyesight struggled to adjust, though he was able to make out the form of the dog slinking its way back behind the tree. In that moment, he snapped out of whatever trance he found himself in and bolted back inside the camper van, slamming the flimsy door closed behind him in the process. He wasted no time stabbing the key into the ignition and twisted it in a desperate way. The old engine stuttered for a moment, but Grayson's worst fears were relieved when the vehicle sputtered to life, shining its headlights across the clearing. Any fear that had been vanquished, however, came rushing back as he spotted not one, but at least 3 dog heads that were revealed under the bathing lights. He watched in horror as one of the figures emerged from the tree line, revealing its twisted, monstrous body to him in the process. While the head was deceptively dog-like, the body could not be described as anything other than the approximation of a person. It seemed to Grayson as if the dog had been warped, stretched into the closest thing resembling a human body as was physically possible. The creature walked on unnaturally long, stilt-like legs that bent at odd angles, giving it a crooked, gangly appearance. Its posture was hunched, and it wore a deceivingly friendly blue collar around its neck, with a tag that caught the headlights almost more than its bright eyes meant for hunting in the dark. The creature was fast. It sprinted to the left and out of sight, slinking back into the safety of the shadows around the side of the RV. Frozen again, but breaking out of it quickly, Grayson threw the vehicle into reverse and stepped on the gas, sending it flying out of the clearing and back onto the small path. Watching the rearview mirror, he saw the red taillights reveal the path, as well as a couple more figures that slinked around calmly and gracefully. Just as soon as he was ready to throw it into drive again, he was greeted by 3 of the creatures, which blocked the exit path. They stood at about the same height as his RV, and advanced on it, taking steps closer and closer, tongues writhing like snakes in their mouths. Grayson couldn't believe he ever mistook that thing for a normal dog, now that he saw them for the freakish monsters that they were, with their massive fangs and crude, disgusting bodies. Unsure what else to do, Grayson stepped on the gas and floored it with the intention of hitting and killing his assailants. However, rather than running out of the way, or being flattened to the road like he intended, he watched as the beasts launched themselves straight into the air with powerful leaps. His vehicle pounded and creaked as he felt the weight of the 3 massive bodies land atop his roof. At this, Grayson panicked and began to speed and swerve as he drove down the narrow wooden path. Above him was the screeching sound of metal being torn and clawed at. To his right, he watched as the face of a dark furred figure sank into view from atop his roof. The thing almost seemed to smile at him for a moment, before it thrusted a muscular arm through the window, sending shards of glass all over the passenger seat and floor of the cab. It let out a low, guttural growl as it pawed at Grayson with long, crooked fingers, attempting to reach further and further into the window. While he scrunched himself against the driver's side door, Grayson noticed a tree coming up on his right side that stuck out quite a bit into the path. While he swerved the RV in that direction, he ended up turning too much and clipped the front of his vehicle on the tree, which knocked out one of his much-needed headlights. On the bright side, he heard a crunch and a yelp as the black-furred hand of the beast was ripped from his passenger window and presumably sent tumbling down the path behind him. The vehicle lurched and shook from the impact. Trying his best to keep the car straight and out of harm with the headlight missing, Grayson tuned out the scraping and banging that continued on the roof above him. After another close call with a tree, he heard the distinct sound of his door being popped open. It was a flimsy door and would sometimes unlatch on the highway or a particularly bumpy road. Spinning around in his seat, he quickly deduced that this was not one of those cases. Descending from the roof in the dark was what could have easily been mistaken for the shape of a person. But Grayson knew better. He watched in horror as the creature came down and swung itself into the back of his home with one graceful movement. As if he wasn't already overwhelmed in shock and fear, Grayson's eyes went back to the road to find that he had missed a turn in his distraction and was now barreling directly towards the tree line. Just as the unwanted passenger was within arm's reach, the RV slammed hard into a set of small trees, knocking a couple over, but coming to a crashing halt nonetheless. Grayson felt himself lurch forward, his head colliding hard with the steering wheel. A trail of blood leaked from the gash just above his nose as he began to lose vision and hearing. He wasn't even able to process what the fates of his pursuers had been as he opened the driver's side door and let himself drop to the comforting forest floor. The last thing that came into view as his vision faded were a pair of disjointed, claw-like feet that stalked like a mother not wanting to wake the baby that just went down for a nap. The nap lasted until he awoke to something pulling at his wrists. He looked up to find that he had been restrained with ropes. To his delight, the ones tying him up appeared to be human, not whatever beast had been chasing him through the woods. "Please," he was able to gasp out. "Let me go. I can't promise you much, but whatever it is you want, just take it." Grayson pleaded and pulled at his restraints. "Just let me go. I promise I'll never tell anyone about you or whatever this freaky, fucked up place is." The figure above him stood, silently observing Grayson as he sat there on his knees, hands tied to either side and blood still dripping from his face. The figure wore a green cloak that hung low over its face, obscuring whatever hints might give away his identity. Leather gloves covered the man's hands, and a metal sigil of what appeared to be a wolf clasped his cloak just below his chin. "You are what we want," the figure said simply, and sank from view into the darkness. "Hey, wait! Get back here! Wait, please!" Grayson shouted, but both figures disappeared silently without another word to him. As he struggled against the ropes that kept him in place, he was finally able to take in his surroundings. Encircling him was an ominous mass of candles. Some, about half of them, were lit and supplied a little light, while the others remained dark. Beside him were a couple of skinny trees, but other than them, he appeared to be in a clearing. In the distance, there were what appeared to be a few lights, the windows of a house if he had to guess by the spacing and look. From that direction, he watched as what appeared to be just a normal dog approached him. It walked, but not with any of the grace or instinct that a real canine would have. It was clumsy, lurching and crawling more so than moving in stride, which reminded Grayson of a newborn fawn taking its first steps. It was a brown dog with a red collar around its neck and a golden tag hanging from it. It stopped just before Grayson and stared at him with dead, sedated-looking eyes. From the collar, he was able to read the name, Prince. When he met the eyes of the dog again, he was horrified to find that they had rolled back, revealing only pale whites, with red veins patterning them. Prince lurched forward once, then again, before it was right up in front of him. Drops of blood trickled from the eyes and nose of the dog as it was jerked upright to its hind legs. The canine moved its head closer to Grayson's and dropped its jaw into an unnaturally wide, gaping maw. Gazing into the mouth, Grayson could see nothing but complete darkness, despite the candles illuminating the dead, stretched face of the dog along with its glistening sharp teeth. For a moment, Grayson spotted a glint of light from within the infinite darkness. Then, from it shot a pair of dark, clawed hands. They flew with great speed from the mouth of the animal and straight into the open, screaming mouth of Grayson. The screams were muffled as the dark mass began to slither down the man's throat, causing him to choke and writhe. The restraints held his arms in place as he instinctively tried to grab at his throat, his face, the dog, anything he could. The mass continued to go deeper, suffocating Grayson while funneling itself inside his body. As it did, the dog began to deflate like a balloon and started getting sucked in with the rest of whatever now resided inside it. First, the tail was inverted into its body, then the hind legs, followed by the torso. It was like the act of inverting a sock that came out the wrong way in the wash. Grayson's chokes died, and tears streamed down his face as nothing was left of the dog but its shrunken head and toothy mouth. Suddenly, everything stopped. There were a few final seconds where Grayson was aware of the alien presence that had almost fully entered his body. But then, just as quickly as they had before, a pair of black hands reached from Grayson's mouth and grabbed hold of the Labrador's floating head. The hands then twisted the head in the air and brought it down directly on top of Grayson's, replacing everything from the neck up with the visage of the disturbing, shriveled dog, which was juxtaposed by the bright red collar that still managed to cling to its neck. After another moment of silence, Grayson began to move. First, it was a little twitch in his fingers, but then it took on the form of convulsing. Soon, the body was bubbling the way cheese would in the oven, rising in patches and lowering as the flesh and bone went through a severe dysmorphic transformation. A man's scream mixed with a dog's howl erupted from beneath the shriveled head, which became more clear as the two skulls merged into one. The legs and spine of the man elongated, and clawed hands tore away at the rope that used to restrain them. The creature fell forward, shedding skin and blood to be replaced with matted fur and to make way for the new occupant inside. From the mouth of the creature fell human teeth, and in their place grew long, sharp fangs that glistened in the surrounding candlelight. From the mouth of the creature fell human teeth, and in their place grew long, sharp fangs that glistened in the surrounding candlelight. The rolled back eyeballs of the dog were popped from their sockets and replaced with new ones, which were suspiciously the same hazel color as Grayson's. The beast let out another heaving roar, this time coughing up something pink and fleshy. A brain, or the smashed remains of one, spilled from the creature's guts along with something else that was harder to notice. From the mouth bounced a shadow in the shape of a person. A silhouette almost. It had the thin suggestion of arms, legs, a body, and a head, but appeared as nothing more than a simple approximation of a figure that skewed the light like a fog. The shadow ran off into the night as the creature heaved up another set of organs along with what appeared to be the man's heart. The beast took a stand on what used to be toes, but now served as the clawed paws of a newborn monstrosity. The gold name tag reading Prince still hung from the red collar that sat around the beast's neck. Rejuvenated with life, Grayson let out a deep, guttural howl into the night, which was met by 6 unseen figures that joined in along with it. This created a haunting symphony of howls that echoed throughout the land. On stilted, crooked legs, the creature took off with unnatural speed into the night, with only one goal in its mind. After the beast was gone, the man in the green cloak who had talked to Grayson returned. Around the circle where the disgusting act had just taken place sat 13 candles, 6 of which were lit. With the flick of a match, the man lighted another, before he walked off into the night with the other monsters.